On the Little side, as far back as we know for sure, is Andrew Jackson Little the First. He was called Jack. We think his dad may have been William Little, who was born in South Carolina and married an Elizabeth J. McAllister in Georgia, 1846. Together, they had 7 kids. Andrew Jackson Little I married Mary Elsie Ruthine Clementine Parsons, or Ellen for short, in 1880. His 13 children were born in Tennessee, including Andrew Jackson Little II. Andrew Jackson Little II married Deborah Sina Dulbury in Tennessee and moved to Alabama, where they had 8 kids. When she passed away in 1920, he married Debbie Jane Jones. They had 8 kids, only 2 of which survived to be adults, including Fred Rayford Little. Fred married Patricia Herbst in Illinois in 1960. They have 6 kids, including my dad, William Andrew Little.
I'm Alabama bound. I'm Alabama bound. And if this train don't stop and turn around, I'm Alabama bound.
Hi, my name is Erica Little. I've been interested in family history for quite a while now, especially the detective side of it. A trip to fix up the family graveyard in Alabama seemed like an excellent opportunity for me to explore my roots even further and learn more about those in my family who, in reality, I didn't know very much about. I took my camera and filmed an adventure.
Came down here to work together as a family to fix up the cemetery that was damaged when the storm came through. It's a nice opportunity to get to do something like this because we don't always get together with family, so when you can get different parts together and be able to do something together, it's really special.
I think it's great. Grandpa's worked really hard on the family tree, and the family is working very hard on the graveyard. And I think that's good. It's restoring history in a way. You can find out who your ancestors were and how your lives are joined together over the years. What sort of things they did, how the world has changed over the years and progressed. And you can look back and see actually what a hard time those people had.
It's hard to imagine what it was like back then. We've had it made. Each generation is better than the last generation. And I can't imagine what it was like. Because sharecropping, which is what they did, was not an easy way of life. That's for sure.
A lot of people worked very, very hard for you to have what you have now. It isn't something that's of your own work or something of your own desserts or anything like that. It's where we are is because of a lot of people's hard work and dedication.
What you gonna do? Arkansas
It was tough, very tough. Challenging. We never had any money. Our finances were nil. We didn't have any. So we were just poor farm labor or sharecroppers. If you're a sharecropper, you get money in the fall, and that had to last you all winter. And in the summer, you were broke again, and you'd start all over. We never had a lot of money. We didn't starve, but we never had a lot of money. And none of my ancestors did either, so there was nothing to inherit.
They farmed and they just had, what I would call a rough life. They probably didn't know anything different. That's the way they had been used to it.
And I can't imagine what it was like. Because sharecropping, which is what they did, was not an easy way of life. That's for sure.
The way sharecropping works is that a farmer has a lot of acreage. If a person had more land than he wanted to farm, he would allow other people. It's like a lease, really. So you lease his land and you have to pay him a share of the profits you make off of it. So it's up to you to, maintain the crops, sow them and plow them and all that, pick them. So then at the end of the harvest time, you got to give him a certain percent of the profits. So if you didn't make anything, he didn't get anything. But very seldom you didn't get, something off of it. I don't remember too many bad years for crops. Especially cotton, it always produced.
We grew cotton and corn and a few soybeans for hay to feed the cows. That we always had a couple of milk cows and the mules, the horses, whichever we had, for plowing. Everything was done by mules back then and horses.
So farming back in those days wasn't easy compared to what it is now, because everything now is done by machinery, and we had none of that.
It was just, the cotton was what our livelihood really was. And back then, I've chopped cotton all day long for 75. Well, he's giving kids 75 cents, but he paid me $1 because I kept up with him, and my sister, she didn't, so she got 75 cents and I got $1.
While we were farm labor and sharecroppers, I didn't do a lot because I was too small. Just kind of hang around and watch them. If Mom was picking cotton and I got tired, I'd lay on her cotton sack and she'd drag me through the fields while I was sleeping. I had a little bag probably about that long that I used to pick the cotton and put in. Probably take me all day to fill up that little bag. And the other bags were like 6 feet long. And they'd fill those things up a few times a day. A good cotton picker. So, and you got paid by the pound. How would you take it out of the bowl? They call it a bowl. It was like this, and when it opened up, it was like that. So you had to put your hands in there just right in order to get the cotton out. And each one of those had a sharp tip on it. So if you missed, you got stabbed with it. So you had to be very careful or very precise in how you went in there to get that cotton. But it's pretty heavy. You filled up one of those cotton bags, sacks, it'd be a couple 100 pounds, 250 pounds. And that was not bad for pay. Sometimes we would trade chickens or eggs for what we need to eat, like flour and sugar and stuff like that, cornmeal, because we didn't have money to buy it. So they had what they call a rolling store. It was like a big bus, and he had all his groceries in there on shelves. And underneath the thing, he had cages for the chickens. So he'd take a chicken for, trade it, and he'd just throw it in a cage and give you the food it was worth. Most of them had a store in one of the little cities like Thacker or Hollywood. And they had the, rolling store to take food out to the rural areas and supply to people. If they had coffee, you could get coffee from them. But during that time, it was during Depression, and didn't have real coffee. I didn't drink it, but I hear it was terrible tasting. And they didn't have a lot of butter, and they use shortening, and they cooked with that, and that was terrible stuff too. We always had chickens and usually pigs, because that was their main food. A cow for milk. We always had a cow.
We were poor, but everybody was poor.
It was a fact of life. You got to take it and run with it.
The sharecropping that they did, was a hard life. So they didn't have anything. They lived day to day. Where we can, I think we're fortunate enough to sit there and look at a plan, look at the future, plan on the future, and know where we want to go. For them, it was just survival, I think, day to day, more than anything else.
I think you learn a lot of values, value of things, the importance things, and how to treat people and things.
We had no running water. We had no wash houses. We didn't have a hell of a lot of anything, did we, Fred? No screen doors, no screen windows. The birds flew through, the chickens was always up in the window.
It was when we finally got indoor plumbing. We didn't have to pee in the can next to the bed at night, and we didn't have to take a bath in the wash tub on the back porch. We shared bath water.
And just every place we went, we had to walk. Even we had shoes, we didn't wear them. During the summer, we couldn't wait until May 1st. May 1st, we shed the shoes. You probably didn't put them on again until winter. Of course, you always picked the sandy spots to walk.
It was all dirt roads, and my mom, this is the first thing that I ever remember. She was carrying a turn of corn. Back then, you had to get your own meal made, shell the corn, and had to haul it to, or carry it to the grist mill. And Mr. Elder Van Sanders had a grist mill down the road about a mile and a half. And she was walking and carrying that, and I was walking along, and I heard something coming, so I looked around, and I thought, Lord, that's the biggest bug I ever saw. It was a T-model Ford. It had headlights about that big, and it sat out on the fender. I thought that was the biggest eyed thing I ever saw. And I got over in the field, and he come on up there and picked Mom up. That was Mr. Elder Van Sanders, and told her, come on, I'll ride you down to the mill. He tried to get me to come, and I just run alongside. I keep up with him on old roads, so I wouldn't get in that thing. I was afraid of it. But that's one of the first things that I remember in my lifetime. All I ever saw was mules and wagons and buggies and stuff like that for a few years.
Andrew Jackson Little II and Debbie Jane Jones celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in the year 1930. They had 3 sons by this time, J.B., James Lloyd, and Andrew Jackson Little III, better known as Junior. Now that we know how they lived, let's continue ahead to 2 years later. 1932. It was the time when you could buy a Chevrolet Roadster for only $445, or a pound of steak for 20 cents. Franklin D. Roosevelt was campaigning against Herbert Hoover for presidential office. Ford had just unveiled its new V8 cylinder engine. The Lindbergh baby was kidnapped, and the Great Depression was gathering strength. In Alabama, the infamous trials of the Scottsboro Boys were going on. And in the middle of all of this, a great tragedy took place, one that passed unnoticed by the majority of our nation. The date, March 21st, 1932.
This is my oldest brother. His name was Jackson B. He was blown away in a tornado, 1932.
We had quite a few people killed in it, but it come just on this angle, and it just tore corns off. This area here they call carns, and it just literally tore it up. It was unreal. It was nothing to see a sage straw go through a tube before. Oh, I was scared to death.
They didn't have warning systems back in those days, so you didn't know if it was a thunderstorm or what it was. But it took the whole house off of them and left most of the people still in bed, except one half brother and my oldest brother, and it blew them out of the house. JB, it blew him up in the fork of a tree, and a 2x4 cut his leg off. So before they found him, he'd already bled to death.
JB would never make it back home alive, but his half-brother Ira Tate would eventually make it back to the family homestead. Bruised and wounded, he would narrowly miss falling down a submerged well just within sight of home, or the place where home used to be.
My sister, half-sister, was up covering up all the other people that were still in bed with quilts because all the debris was flying around, so they wouldn't get injured. And she had pit marks all in her head from, getting hit.
I remember my dad talking about it. Talking about Annie Mae disappeared. And of course they're out looking everywhere for people. Well, they found Aunt Annie Mae asleep with two little kids under a mattress out in the field. She had been thrown and tossed, but she hung on to them two little kids. And somebody was calling her, so she had just happened to hear them and woke up totally exhausted, I guess.
But no one else actually got really injured from it.
The tornado that killed JB was actually part of a massive tornado outbreak that swept across Alabama and into neighboring states. It hit in 3 separate waves and lasted throughout the day. In Alabama alone, 332 people were killed.
It was like temperatures in the 60s, dew point like 62. There was a strong south wind. It was very cloudy. And, it rained a little bit that morning. When I look at it, it doesn't look that impressive to me. But it really turned out to be an incredible event. 10 of those 14 tornadoes in Alabama that day were rated EF3 or higher. They had 0 warning. There wasn't television. Radio stations had no way of knowing. It literally, came down to calling to communities ahead. And a lot of times you couldn't do that because the phone lines would be down.
It scared my mom so bad. Years after that, if we lived someplace and didn't have a storm cellar, we had to dig one. And if it thundered, we were in that storm cellar. So it was a frightening ordeal for them.
This event right here, you would think would have spurred some people to have, worked a little harder to forecast tornadoes, but no. It's really a very forgotten event. When you look at it nationally, it's not an event that's talked about. I think one thing that's really interesting as I started looking at these tornadoes was that it not only was a stormy time in the weather, but it was a hugely stormy time in our country because of the Depression and what was going on in Europe. Because Hitler was beginning to come to power in Germany, and there were a lot of problems around the world. And I think those things are fascinating.
Times weren't easy, and it was no exception for the little family. At the time of the tornado, Debbie Jane was pregnant with her fourth child, Virgil. He was born August 5th, 1932, only to pass away 3 weeks later, on August 27th.
This is Virgil. I'm not 100% sure why he died, but I think it was probably like pneumonia or something.
Medicine was not as advanced as it is now. Visits to the doctor were few and far between, and most often families relied on home remedies that had been passed down through the generations, like those Debbie Jane inherited from her mother.
She always treated us with herbs, like Grandma did. I remember she used to make pumpkin seed tea, and she used something called black draught. That's why I can't drink tea, because it tastes the same. And she'd give us that when we got sick, and castor oil.
Even the common cold was dangerous. Many sicknesses that are easily prevented or cured today were cause for concern, and, as in Virgil's case, could prove deadly.
But, you know, sometimes there isn't a medication that will take care of what disease they got, or is advanced so far that they can't cure it. You know, they didn't catch it in time. They died from things that weren't curable.
Almost 2 whole years after Virgil's birth and passing, Debbie Jane gave birth to her very first daughter, Mary Magdalene, or Mary-Aline to those who knew her. Fred Rayford would follow, little more than a year later, in November of 1935. It was a time of social unrest for the United States, still suffering from the Great Depression and reeling with news of John Dillinger's exploits and those of Babyface Nelson and Bonnie and Clyde. The Dust Bowl crisis wreaked disaster in the Great Plains, and a record-setting heat wave enveloped the entire nation. The situation in Europe was hardly any better. Still, things were going comparably well in northeastern Alabama, and, it seemed, for the little family. Baby Gladys would arrive in the summer of 1938. But on February 13th, 1939, when Mary-Aline was only 4 years old.
She wanted to go see her grandma's grave. Of course, there wasn't nowhere for us to go or nothing to do. So we walked down by the barn and up to Grandma's grave. And we sat down and played in the dirt and walked back to the house.
He had a big fire built, you know, around a pot. It's a steel pot, black kettle. They build the fire and then they'd boil the clothes to get them clean.
Mary-Aline had on a real circle full skirt. And as she walked by that flame, it got the skirt. She broke to run. Mama got her. Miss Debbie came out of the house and all she could see was fire. So she had a broom in her hand and she just went trying to put the fire out. And I remember Daddy and him carrying her off the mountain. And that god-awful odor of that baby burning. And then sometime during the night, they came back, bringing her back, and she was gone. But I still dream of that once in a while.
Well, it was scary, you know, everybody was screaming and yelling, and they hauled her off to, we had to go all the way to Scottsboro for a doctor, so you know what that distance is, to get down the mountain and get down to town. It was, during that time, it was probably an hour drive to get down there, at least. But as soon as that dress blew up over her head, that's, you know, affected her lungs immediately, so they didn't know what to do to help her breathe. So she actually died before they got down there. Her name was Mary Magdalene.
Only a few months after the tragic death of Marilyn, the entire world was thrown into chaos. World War II began. Although the US would still enjoy 2 years of relative peace, they would officially declare war against the Axis powers in December of 1941.
My Uncle Joe, I think, was in World War II. My cousin Alvin, he was in World War II.
Yes, ma'am. I went in 43 and got out in 46.
Yeah, back them days, everybody usually stood right up and volunteered. I mean, take me, I'll go.
A lot of people worked at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville. That's where they made all the ammo and stuff like that, bombs.
The Redstone Arsenal Complex established a commendable record in World War II as one of the best equipped, most productive chemical munitions manufacturing centers in the nation. Over 45 million units of ammunition were loaded and assembled for shipment at the Arsenal Complex between March 1942 and September 1945. For their exceptional work, personnel at the Arsenal Complex won the prestigious Army-Navy E Award 9 different times for their outstanding record in the production of war equipment.
Some 50 miles away, the hard work of day-to-day survival continued for most of the little family. But echoes of the conflict would reach even the more remote areas of rural northeastern Alabama.
And I remember during the war, we see these weird things flying in the air. It used to come over to scare the heck out of us. But, we didn't know what it was. Never seen it before, never heard of it before.
Went in service at 18 years old, and I was in the paratroopers airborne. Yeah, I made 2 combat jumps. I was supposed to went to San Francisco and went to Pacific, but while I was home on a 30-day leave, they dropped the atomic bombs, and I kept hearing over the radio. That's all the thing we had back then.
The Japanese offer of unconditional surrender is official. It has been accepted.
I remember when that was over. Never saw such a party in my life. There wasn't too many people lived in Corns, but every one of them is standing in the middle of the road and shouting. Just remember how these women were crying and screaming, and their loved ones were finally going to get to come home.
World War II would officially end a few weeks after the Japanese surrender on September 2nd, 1945, having lasted 6 years and a day. Shortly after World War II began, a series of epidemics erupted across the nation. Cases of illnesses like polio, scarlet fever, diphtheria, measles, and meningitis rose sharply in number. It was meningitis that would claim the life of Gladys Sarah Jane Little. The connection between epidemics like that of meningitis and wartime was detailed in a health report published shortly after World War II concluded. And to quote the U.S. Army's findings in preventative medicine in World War II, beginning in the fall of 1942, the number of cases began to rise among both Army personnel and civilian populations. From 1942 through 1944, the United States experienced the most severe epidemic ever recorded by the United States Public Health Service.
And she had spinal meningitis, which is a very deadly disease back in those days. So she died from that. She was the cutest little blonde you ever saw. And she loved fish. And we have to catch fish for her in the morning for breakfast. Not eggs, fish. So this one time we tried to fool her. We had turtle. we ate turtle also. So Mom cooked up the turtle and put it on her plate, and she had a fit. I don't want turtle, I want fish. She was spoiled, though. Everybody was spoiled there. Well, it was terrible because we all loved her so much. It's a cute little thing. It's life, you know. You're born and you die. We weren't ready for it. We never are ready for it. And we didn't really want to give her up that early, you know. But it was time for her to go.
Andrew Jackson Little II would miss the passing of his daughter, being unjustly imprisoned at the time for moonshining.
I don't think he drank at all. I think Mom was too strict on it. And she didn't like that at all. Thought that was terrible stuff. And I don't think she allowed Dad to drink. If he did, it wasn't, you know, where she could find out. And as far as I know, he didn't make moonshine, but even though he went to prison for that.
This is a raid on a moonshine still operating in the southern part of the United States.
He wasn't making moonshine when the feds picked him up and put him in jail. It was somebody else they had caught. And the guy says, he was an older guy like my dad. So he told them, told the feds, go after those guys that they were running away, and I'll sit here and wait for you. So as soon as they left, he jumped on his horse and took off. So then they come up to the house and arrested my dad, who had been plowing in the field all day. So he was nowhere around us still. So they told me, yeah, you're the right one. They took him to jail. I'm not sure who owned the steel. My brother-in-law, Tom Treese, he was there. That was my stepsister Annie Mae's husband. He went to prison also. I'm not sure who else was there that ran away, but it belonged to those guys and not my dad. The square is the courthouse. It's where they have all the trials. The police used to be in there. I'm not sure if they're still there. The jail was in the basement. It's not a trial with a jury, it's just a judge and, you know, your lawyer. So you go in and they read the complaint against you, and lawyer, I guess, argues a little bit for you, and the judge says, okay, you're going to prison. If you got caught making a moonshine, I think you spent a year and a day to 18 months in prison, a federal prison. And the federal prison that he went to was in Georgia. Got a picture of him when he was in prison. And when Dad got out of prison, that's where we met him. And that's where I was born. I remember when he came home from prison, we were at, I think it's probably his sister's house. And they lived in a sharecropper's house. It was built down in the middle of the field. And I remember that the floor was actually dirt. It didn't have, you know, regular floors in it. And I remember him coming there. Of course, after that, we moved someplace else. Well, it was nice. You know, we were more like a family again. He wasn't quite the same when he got home as he was before he left. He didn't have as much patience with other boys as he, you know, should have. So this one time he was going to whip my older brother, and Mom told him he better not, so he didn't. You know, we had a little farm out on Crow Mountain there where Grandma was buried. That was my mom's farm. So we farmed, and when he got back, we still farmed. But he he didn't last a long time after he got back. He had a massive stroke and it did him in. You know, we always got up early when we lived on the farms. And I think he sat up on the bed and he had the stroke and he just fell back into bed. And that was about it. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't, you know, move or anything. So they took him to Scottsboro, and then he died. I think one of the photos you got was a person laying in the casket. And I was standing right to the right of it. That was my dad. It didn't change at all. I was had to do the same thing to survive. You know, farm labor.
It was a dark time for the little family. Shortly after her husband was jailed, Debbie Jane would discover that she was pregnant with her youngest child, Joseph Chester. Baby Joseph would survive to meet his father, only to pass away less than 2 months after Andrew Jackson Little II was buried. A few years later, as World War II was finally coming to a close, Debbie Jane would suffer her last loss, that of James Lloyd.
Mom and Dad had 8 kids, and out of the 8, only 2 survived to be, you know, adults. The rest of them all died 8 and under, except my one brother. He was 16 when he passed away. And this was the oldest oldest of the kids that died, James Lloyd. He had rheumatic fever, enlarged heart. And back in those days, they didn't do heart replacements. So he was a little ahead of time. I knew he was going to die, but he was sick for a long time. We used to take him to Birmingham for treatments and checkup. Well, there's no chance for him. They didn't have a time period that he would live in. Even though Mom was against alcohol, she allowed this neighbor to make what we call home brew for him to drink. It was supposed to help him. So again, that's something that's made out of malted corn, and you just let it brew, and it's kind of a heavy malt type stuff, and it was supposed to help him, but it didn't save him. And it just took a toll on him. He died. So that's the whole crew.
You know, how rough was life back then that, you know, everybody was killed, everybody died tragically. You know, things that you would never hear of now. Somebody blew away in a storm, somebody caught fire and got pneumonia or whatever. So I was thinking that my grandmother, how hard it was to be living in that era or whatever, and think how blessed we are and how lucky we are to have the life that we have. We wouldn't have even known how to have existed in that environment. Do you know what I'm saying?
You know, it's probably very normal to my dad, but, you know, looking back and seeing how hard they had to work and a lot of the things that they did without, you know, really kind of makes you thankful for the things that you have.
Mom made it on her own, worked hard, picking cotton, chopping cotton, all that stuff. She was a kind person, very hard working. Everybody liked her. And she did a terrific job, I think, raising my brother and I with, you know, what little resources she had. And she's always working. You know, someone had farm work that needed to be done, you know, cotton picking or whatever, she's always willing to do it. Of course, they didn't pay very much back in those days, but things weren't very expensive either. So if we got a new pair of shoes once a year and maybe 1 or 2 pairs of overalls, we were doing great. Mom always wanted us to go to school. That was important. She never had a chance to do it. She probably might have got into 4th grade. but she, always told us that we had to go to school. Of course, having Ola May staying with us, and the teacher, that made a big difference. As they started school in the fall, and they stopped in the summer. And sometimes if they started school early in the fall, they would take a certain period of time out for harvesting. So they'd have a break there. They were geared around the farmer. We lived up on a main road where we came into the grave, a little further down, and I started school, first grade. And the school teacher actually lived with us in that house. So I'd go to school in the morning, I'd walk with her and home at night.
Well, last year I taught out there, I stayed with Fred and his mother and Junior. It was real nice. They were a real nice family. Yeah, Fred was always all right. Junior was too, he's just mischievous.
The school we went to was just one room, and it had 6 grades in it. So you were in little sections. The little guys up front and the big guys in the back. One teacher. Well, we didn't do a lot of sports. We were too small for that. I think one of my favorite things was that on the weekends we would climb a mountain. We'd get together with our friends, decided to see who could come down the mountain the furthest without touching the ground, without walking on the ground. So you had to go from tree to tree down the mountain. So we were like squirrels. This one time we were coming down, and my brother Andy jumped over in a big skinny poplar tree, and the top broke out. He was up pretty high, and down below was big boulders, huge. He's coming down on his head like this. All of a sudden he just turned around and landed on his feet. I thought he was dead. We didn't do that too many times after that. That was scary. But he was all right. We walked the rest of the way down the mountain. And we used to fish, swim. We had a hole in the mud creek. Anything we could find to get into, we play. And when we were on the farm, if it was raining, we'd go play in the barn. We'd build forts in the hay, and we'd have a game we call cob battling. We'd have a group up in the loft of the barn and guys on the ground, and then we'd throw corn cobs at each other. And if you're on the ground, you look for the soggiest ones you could find.
Yeah.
And when those things hit you, it hurt. Or if they were in a cow do or whatever. Kind of a cutthroat game. She did get some welfare for a while. And after Andy went into the service, he used to send us money. He joined the National Guard in Albertsville, and they got paid a certain amount a month too, so that helped out. And when he went in active duty, they got called in during the Korean War, and he got a salary, so he'd send money home. She really a strong lady. She lost her 6 kids and her husband, and she's still going strong. Then she married again when I was 15 or 16. So she had stayed single all that time, and she decided to marry again, and she married Tommy Johnson. And he was okay. He treated me nice. Of course, my brother Andy was gone. He was in the Army at the time. So I was home. And again, he was a sharecropper, and we lived different places. We lived at Albertsville when they got married. And then we moved up to just south of Stevenson. And he was farming with my Uncle William. So we did that for a year or so. And then I decided I was going to head north. So I came to Chicago.
And here we are, some 50 plus years later, the little family reuniting together, working together to honor the past and looking ahead with Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I'm thankful that we had the opportunity to get together and do this project. Coming out here to work on this project in the cemetery, getting a chance to come back to some place where it's probably been over 20 years since I've been here with my family. Just was a really neat opportunity.
I think it's very cool. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be a part of the first part of it, but
That was pretty darn level.
we wouldn't have missed it. This was fun. It's good for the kids to see.
I just think it's cool how your family gets together and does all these things.
What do you think of the fence?
It's great, great, really nice. I wanted to do this for about 10 years.
That's why I came. Hopefully we accomplished what we came for. I think we did. Fred seems to be happy with what we've done. So admire him for doing that and wanting to do it.
Family's important, and you got to appreciate it. So that's the biggest part.